We're going to go from one good guest to another good guest. Caleb Maupin. How you doing, Caleb? You doing okay this morning?
I'm good. How about yourself?
I am doing all right. I am doing all right. Caleb Maupin, speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, author. He is director for Center for Political Innovation, and a damn good friend of the show. So thank you for joining me, man.
Sure.
Um, I would be remiss if I didn't get your take on kind of what John was saying at the very end. This idea of the veto. Look, I've heard that argument before of basically you have all of these Arab states, all of these Muslim states, all of them agreed. Russia and China were isolated. And in the context of them being isolated, they decided to abstain for multiple reasons. One is the isolation. Two, they didn't necessarily want to ruin their relationship with the Arab states. Um, Give me your take on that. I'm just curious. I mean, and there's the other third thing of this doesn't change any facts on the ground. Like the very basic question of, well, how do you plan to disarm Hamas? I don't have an answer for that. I don't think they do either. Give me your take on this.
Well, I think, unfortunately, if you listen to the speeches that were made by the Russian representative to the Security Council, the Chinese envoy, they were making clear that this is an awful situation. This is a bad deal that doesn't recognize the Palestinians and their sovereignty. It's a huge
Yeah.
violation of their right to have self-governance, basically. You're imposing an international body on them. But it's a question of we vote for this, and this deal, has been accepted by the Palestinians themselves and by Hamas and by the Arab community, or we reject it, and then the violence starts up again and the killing starts up again. And I think that they thought, okay, well, we'll register our complaint. We'll make clear that we don't approve of this, but at this point, we've got the Palestinian leadership accepting it, and the killing stops as they implement it. Or we vote against this, and then we're back to the drawing board, and the bombardment from Israel starts up again. And I mean, it's not a good situation. It's not a situation where people can, say what should be happening. It's a question of what is actually going to happen, and it was either accept this deal or we're back to square one, and the bombardment continues. And that's kind of where things are at, and that the Palestinians themselves did agree to it. So there you go.
I guess the question becomes, how do they even implement this? Like, I don't even know the pathway to implementing this. I mean, it
Yeah.
seems like Israel is trying to get what it couldn't accomplish in a war through the UN Security Council. And it's like, okay, so who are the troops going to be? What are they going to be? Turks, Egyptians, Saudi Arabians? Who's that quote unquote stabilization force going to be? And is that stabilization force going to directly engage Hamas in order to disarm? Like all of this sounds, it sounds like a plan without a plan, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I mean, we saw Donald Trump with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia at the White House, rolling out the red carpet for him and playing up
Prince
their
Bonesaw.
relationship. And,
Yep.
the relationship between the USA and Saudi Arabia is much more complicated than it used to be. It used to be, you basically just considered Saudi Arabia to be an outpost of Western, colonialism in the region. I mean, the House of Saud was basically selected by the British Empire. The Sykes-Picot Agreement put them in charge of the Arabian Peninsula.
Hmm.
But now we have a situation where, because hydraulic fracking and deep sea drilling have gotten to the point that the world isn't dependent on Saudi Arabia the way they once were, you have the Crown Prince, who has centralized a lot of power in his own hands, and kind of trying to figure out like more independence for Saudi Arabia. And then the whole thing is Saudi Arabia wants to build nuclear power plants, and Trump is agreeing to help make it happen because he'd rather have American companies set up Saudi nuclear power plants than have Russian companies do it. Russia was told by Biden to go all in against Russia. They refused. The Saudi
Hmm.
government refused to just cooperate, with the all-out anti-Russia campaign, because they need to negotiate with Russia about oil price outputs. And we have an increasingly independent Saudi Arabia, and we have the United States trying to use them in the way that they've used them before Saudi Arabia also has to maintain its credibility, and right now they can't recognize Israel after everything Israel has done. They have to maintain an anti-Israel stance, and they've restored relations with Iran. For a long time, the strategy was to polarize the region between allies of Saudi Arabia and allies of Iran. But now Iran and Saudi Arabia have restored diplomatic relations. So we're in kind of a new ballpark, I guess. But Saudi Arabia remains a country that is primarily doing business with the Western countries, a huge purchaser of U.S. weaponry and U.S. military equipment, a huge supplier of oil, and kind of a middleman for ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, and Chevron. So at this point, it's interesting to watch what's happening. I wish people would take notice, though, that Venezuela is an oil-rich country that the USA is threatening to invade and overthrow because of alleged human rights violations or whatever. And it's like, and then Saudi Arabia, another oil-rich country, has no pretense of human rights at all. Everyone in the country is the property of the king. They still cut people's heads off. It's an autocracy in every sense of the word. And we're okay with that, right? And, Trump is there whining and dining with the crown prince. But then, oh, look at Venezuela. Oh, we're just so outraged about these human rights issues, most of which are contrived to begin with and don't reflect the reality. I mean, the hypocrisy should be obvious to everyone.
Yeah. I mean, he chopped a man up with a bone saw. The CIA even pointed out, says, yeah, the MBS was the one who effectively ordered it. And when Donald Trump was effectively asked this at the White House, he comes up with, Donald Trump effectively says bad things happen. Khashoggi was controversial. You shouldn't have to embarrass our guests like this. And of course, MBS is like, oh, it hurts us so bad. It hurts us that this has happened. I didn't know anything about this, of course, but we took all legal measures in order to look into it. It's like, get out of here. Like every intelligence service pointed out that MBS was directly responsible for ordering the guy to be chopped up. He was injected with something. They chopped him up. They dissolved his body in acid. And Trump is like, yada, yada, controversial. Things happen. Yeah. And then Trump even made this point of saying, well, he's done a great job on human rights.
Oh.
Really? Really? What do you make of this relationship? Donald Trump is saying that he's going to apparently sell them F-35s. Israel has obviously been against this, and yet Donald Trump is going to do it anyway. Some people have pointed out that this is a weakening of Israel's influence in the U.S. I don't see that, but maybe I'm misperceiving this.
No, I mean, Saudi Arabia is not an enemy of Israel. I mean, that's something that, I mean, their rhetoric, they criticize Israel. The people in Saudi Arabia are not big fans of Israel, but Saudi Arabia, they are generally an outpost of the Western system. They oppose Israel as a matter of principle as a Muslim country, but they're on the other side. The people opposing Israel tend to be the, Iran-aligned forces, the axis of resistance, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, etc. And Saudi Arabia has often played the role of fighting against those forces. Now, right now, they're in kind of an odd situation where, because what Israel is doing is so horrendous, they have had to de-escalate, their fight against the Houthis in Yemen. They've restored diplomatic relations with Iran, but they're not, Saudi Arabia is not a center of resistance by any means. Saudi Arabia, it's the Wahhabi interpretation of Islam, right? That is the basis for the Saudi monarchy. And they were selected by the British to be the rulers of that particular area. I mean, the borders of the Middle East have been drawn up completely arbitrarily. It's the Sykes-Picot Agreement, right? The original WikiLeaks, you could say, was the Russian Revolution of 1917, that World War I was happening. And during World War I, the Bolsheviks made war against the war makers and took control of the government and overthrew the Tsar was overthrown, and then you had the provisional government. The provisional government was overthrown, and when the Bolsheviks overthrew the provisional government, they leaked all the secret treaties. And one of the treaties was where the maps of the Middle East had been drawn. The Ottoman Empire, Turkey, was on the side of the Germans in World War I, and they were losing. And after World War I, a new Middle East was created, and the Allied countries had drawn all the borders, and all the complicated borders of the Middle East that exist today come from the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which was leaked, a secret treaty that was leaked by the Bolsheviks and made public. And if you look at it, right, the Arabian Peninsula, you have, the House of Saud, they got most of it, but then you have Oman and Yemen. You have Syria, you have the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, you have the Kuwaiti monarchy, you have Qatar, and all of that. It was very nepotistically done. It was certain families. The British kind of just handed out different areas. I mean, it was very much, and then the French got Syria, and I mean, it was very much a calculated thing, and those borders are artificial. And the rallying cry of the Ba'ath movement was there's one Arab people, right? That this is one nationality. They speak Arabic. They are one people. And these borders were drawn up, and these monarchies were created kind of artificially as part of a project for the British to dominate the region. And that the Arab people are one. You also have Persians in Iran. You've got Kurds in the region. You have different ethnic groups, and the modern Middle East, as we understand it, is a product of this secret treaty that the Bolsheviks made public, the Sykes-Picot Agreement.
Yeah, and we've had chaos pretty much ever since the Brits have gone around drawing lines on the map. No, agreed. One of the other things that came up, as you point out, the human rights issue. In fact, I want to show the video. This is a news reporter asking about you chopping up Khashoggi, and how Donald Trump doesn't seem to have an issue with that, and if the prince has anything to say about it. This is a wild clip, and this is this is a wild clip. I'm gonna get your take on this. Come on.
Got a conflict of interest. And Your Royal Highness, the U.S. intelligence concluded that you orchestrated the brutal murder of a journalist. 9/11 families are furious that you are here in the Oval Office.
Who are you with?
Why should Americans
Who are
trust
you with?
And the same to you, Mr. President.
Now, who are you with?
I'm with ABC News, sir.
You with who?
ABC News, sir.
Fake news. ABC fake news. One of
But
the
the question is
worst
legitimate,
in
sir.
the business. But I'll answer your question.
Thank you.
I have nothing to do with the family business. I have left, and when I've devoted 100% of my energy. What my family does is fine. They do business all over. They've done very little with Saudi Arabia, actually. I'm sure they could do a lot. And anything they've done has been very good. That's what we've done. We've built a tremendous business for a long time. I've been very successful. I decided to leave that success behind and make America very successful. And I've made America more successful by far than it ever was, and that it ever could have been, no matter who was president. There would be nobody bringing in $21 trillion. That I can tell you right now. As far as this gentleman is concerned, he's done a phenomenal, extremely controversial. A lot of people didn't like that gentleman that you're talking about. Whether you like him or didn't like him, things happen. But he knew nothing about it, and we can leave it at that. You don't have to embarrass our guest by asking a question. It's not the question that I mind, it's your attitude. I think you are a terrible reporter. It's the way you ask these questions. You start off with a man who's highly respected, asking him a horrible, insubordinate, and just a terrible question. And you could even ask that same exact question nicely. You're all psyched up. Somebody psychs you over at ABC. They're going to psych it. You're a terrible person and a terrible reporter. As far as the Epstein files is,
that's outrageous. That is. And by the way, just to make this point clear, Caleb, Bob Woodward asked Donald Trump about this. And Woodward said, I pressed Donald Trump on MBS's role in the Khashoggi killing during a tape recording interview in 2020. He says, quote, I've gotten involved very much, Trump said. I know everything about the whole situation. So what exactly happened, sir? I asked. Quote, I saved his ass, unquote, Trump said. That's what happened. Saved whose ass? This is what Bob Woodward is asking. MBS, Trump said. They were coming down on him very strongly, but I was able to get Congress to leave him alone. I was able to get them to stop. I'm very friendly with those guys. Which guys? The Saudis? Congress. I'm very friendly with Congress. And now Trump is like, he knew nothing about it. He knew nothing about it. Just outrageous. I'm amazed by that. I don't know.
I mean,
Look,
I
and
don't know. There is an element. I will never forget the day. It was the night before Trump was inaugurated the first time. I was in Trump Tower. It was the day before Trump was inaugurated. They had like a last minute press conference at Trump Tower in New York City the day before
yeah,
the inauguration. And I was in the room with, hundreds of reporters and all of that. And I saw what happened, right? Where that was when I was the reporter from CNN, right? They brought the microphone over to him. He started to ask the question, and then they took it away. And then Trump says, "Don't be rude. Don't be rude. You're fake news." The whole thing was completely set up. It wasn't that the guy asked the question and Trump shut him down. They brought him the microphone to let him start asking the question. It had all been planned, and Trump said to him, "You're fake news." And that's when fake news took
became a
off,
thing.
right? And it's this like theater, right? Like it was arranged that they were going to let him start asking the question, then they were going to cut him off. And I remember the term fake news had been going around before, right, as an allegation against Russia, right? It was that, well, Russia had been promoting all this fake news on the internet, and that's how Trump won. And so then Trump brilliantly hijacked the term fake news and made it his own and called CNN fake news. And that's just a big part of Trumpism, is this kind of performative fighting with the press, scolding the press, criticizing the press. And it's like, I'm against the mainstream media, and the mainstream media are against him, and they performatively fight him. And I watched that, and I'm kind of annoyed with that reporter's tone, because there is this element of like, I mean, the USA coddling the Saudi autocracy is like something that's been going on since 1945. But
Right.
suddenly it became an issue, and it's just a Trump problem, right? It's just a Trump problem, right? And that's what annoys me. And so her tone is like this very performative, like, oh, blah 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 blah. But then on top of that, Trump is like overreacting in this way that is like, his base loves that. They love the way he's talking, and it's like, oh, he's sticking it to the mainstream press. And you know how hard it is to get White House press credentials? I mean, if they didn't really like that woman being there, they could easily just not let her in the room. There's plenty of people who'd like to be in that room and have White House press credentials and don't get it, right? They wanted her there. They want her there to act that way. So then Trump can, oh, you mainstream media, I don't like you. You're a bad person. You're awful. Yeah. I mean, it's all just theater, and it just annoys me that it frustrates me, I guess, that people don't see through this on some level. Like, she's only in the room because they want her there. Right. She's only asking the question about this in like a harsh manner because Trump is the president. And then Trump is making his big show against her because he loves that, because he needs to look like he's against the mainstream media. And it's all just performance. I mean, there's no, I mean, if they really wanted to protect the king from questions like that, they could very easily do it. They wanted that question to be asked. They wanted Trump to performatively go after the person asking the question. I mean, it's like all of that. They have total control over all of that. And they had it happen that way. That was total. That was not a spontaneous occurrence by any means.
I agree with most of what you said. I think the media takes issue with the murder of Khashoggi. If I had to point the finger to anything out of it, because I think from their point of view, okay, this guy was a journalist of sorts.
He was working for the
Washington. Right, he was with the Washington Post.
Yeah,
and he was murdered effectively for his, for whatever was taking place in regards to Saudi politics and his relation to Saudi politics. He was in the U.S. He goes in order to get a certificate in order to get married, and he knows he's in danger. He goes for love and gets murdered. And so if you're a journalist and you're in media, you're like, whoa, that's outrageous. Now, from Biden, when he was on the campaign trail, if you remember, Biden called him like a thug, and I'm not going to shake his hand and all of this other stuff. Whereas Donald Trump.
Then he did. Biden went to Saudi Arabia and was begging them, please cut off Russia. And I mean, Biden did completely. Yeah, I mean.
He did a 180 and he fist bumped him because he didn't want to shake his hand. But I'm saying, I guess my point is, on the campaign trail, Biden was very hyped up about attacking MBS, whereas Donald Trump was always very conciliatory. And I remember when they brought up the Khashoggi thing, when it first happened, Trump looked over to one of his guys and says, how much money is other Saudis investing in the US? And they told him like 20 billion or whatever that number is. And at that point, Trump was like, okay, well, Khashoggi, he's complicated. Like that was, meaning I agree with you. It's performative. I agree with you. They can get rid of that woman if they want to get rid of him. But I do think the press has a bee in their bonnet about the fact that one of theirs was chopped up and dropped in acid.
Well, the Saudis are Republicans. I mean, this is where it gets a little complicated, but the Saudis, they tend to be aligned with the Republican Party, because they purchase weapons in big numbers and they are tied in with the military industrial complex. Whereas the liberals, the intelligence agencies, the CIA, as opposed to the military industrial complex, they have courted the Muslim Brotherhood as proxies. The Muslim Brotherhood's illegal in Saudi Arabia, right? In Saudi Arabia, they absolutely hate the Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood, they are the westernized Muslims or whatever, and they're who the main activist force that the liberal Obama wing would like to align with, right? And the Saudis, they are all about military force, and they're Wahhabis. They're both Sunni Muslims, but Sunni Islam is divided in two, right? There are Sunnis and there are Sunnis, right? In the Middle East, and when you talk about Islamism, you're dealing with three main currents, right? You got what the Saudis are. They're Wahhabis. Right. They want to go back to the 1400s. They, it's like they want to do everything exactly as it was done in the time of the Prophet. They talk about Salafism or whatever. A lot of them eat with three fingers because the Prophet ate with three fingers, right? They believe in having a monarchy because that's what was done at the time of the Prophet. That's Wahhabism. It's this very strict fundamentalist Sunni Islam. That's the Saudi monarchy. That's their ideology. That's Osama bin Laden. That's ISIS. That's a very extreme, interpretation of Sunni Islam. But then you have another wing of Sunni Islam, what they call the westernized Muslims. And that's the ideology of Turkey. That's the ideology of Qatar. That's Al Jazeera. And that's another axis, and that's the Muslim Brotherhood. And it's basically premised on the idea that the Western countries are more true to Islamic principles than the Muslim world is. And it's that, that in the West, because we have the free market and because we have battered women's shelters and because, we mow our lawns and our lawns are perfectly mowed and very disciplined, I guess, that they said the West is more true to Islamic principles than the Middle East is. And that was like a religious movement that started in Egypt, right? And it's this westernized Islam. And that's who the liberals tend to align with. And it's very much, the Muslim Brotherhood. But then you also have the Shia current that's around Iran, which is that's anti-colonial and it kind of, it fits the Islamic tradition in with this kind of anti-colonial, anti-imperialist movement, tied in with the Islamic Revolution of Iran. But so when you look at political Islam, you have those three currents, and the Wahhabis have always been kind of a Republican aligned thing. Wild moment. I remember when Muhammad Ali died. They talked about Muhammad Ali endorsed Ronald Reagan in 1984. And they said, well, that doesn't make any sense, right? He's associated with radical left activism and all of that. But in 1984, Ronald Reagan was getting reelected, and Muhammad Ali had a press conference. He said, I'm endorsing Ronald Reagan. They asked him why. And he said, well, he wants to keep prayer in school. That's enough for me or whatever. It was a very vague thing. What was going on there? Well, Muhammad Ali had joined the Nation of Islam, right? And the Nation of Islam was the Nation of Islam, they're not Sunnis, they're not Shia. It's like a very specific interpretation of the Islamic faith that, draws from the Bible and talks about Black people in America and has it's its own thing. But after Elijah Muhammad died, Elijah Muhammad's son, Wallace Muhammad, went to Saudi Arabia, and the Nation of Islam converted to being Wahhabis. Right. And it was funded by Saudi Arabia.
Really?
And the Nation of Islam under the son, Wallace Muhammad, they became Wahhabis. Then Minister Farrakhan quit the nation, or it wasn't the Nation of Islam. He quit the organization that became Wahhabis and started the Nation of Islam again, that was true to their, original beliefs. But what called itself the Nation of Islam, after the death of Wallace Muhammad or of Elijah Muhammad, became Wahhabis, and they aligned with Saudi Arabia. And that's what Muhammad Ali was. He didn't follow Minister Farrakhan to restart the Nation of Islam. He just, stayed in the organization that was led by Elijah Muhammad's son that were Wahhabis. So he was a Wahhabi, and he was taking political direction from Saudi Arabia, and they were pro-Reagan, right? And Ronald Reagan promised after the Islamic Revolution of Iran, he said, there will never be a revolution in Saudi Arabia. We will never allow it. And that Saudi Arabia, they're Republican aligned. I mean, Democrats coddle them too. They're a Western aligned country in the Middle East, but they tend to lean to the Republican side because they make lots of money selling weapons, and they're in with the military industrial complex. And the Democrats have this kind of fixation on the Muslim Brotherhood that has activists, kind of liberal activists, who go out in the streets and protest, and the Muslim Brotherhood is not trusted by the Saudi monarchy, and it's not trusted by the Republicans. The Republicans tend to be very suspicious of that, whereas Obama and the liberals, they're in with Al Jazeera, and they're in with the Muslim Brotherhood crowd. So that's kind of the point of disagreement there, right? And that you can kind of see that playing out. That the Muslim Brotherhood and their interpretation of Islam is something the liberals find useful, and kind of that was the Arab Spring and all of that. Whereas the Republicans tend to really like the Saudi monarchy is pretty straightforward. We buy weapons. We're an autocracy. That's kind of the issue there. So, I mean, all of this is there, all this stuff about Islamic terrorism and all of that. You have to remember, like, none of this would be an issue if it wasn't for the fact that during the Cold War, the U.S. government saw communism as the main threat. And so they enabled Saudi Arabia to spread its ideology all over the world. And Wahhabism really exploded because a wealthy young Saudi, the billionaire heir to the Saudi, the Saudi state monopoly on construction, Osama bin Laden went around the Muslim world recruiting Muslims from all over the world to fight the Soviet Union and Afghanistan, and spread Wahhabism. And Wahhabi interpretation of Islam was spread all throughout the Middle East because of the United States kind of giving Saudi Arabia permission to do that, to fight the Soviet Union. In addition to that, it's caused problems throughout the region. India really hates the Deobandi schools that were set up by Saudi Arabia. Muslims in India have been radicalized by Saudi Arabia. They've spread Wahhabism to Muslims in India. There's been a lot of terrorism and instability and violence in India and in Pakistan because of these schools that were set up by the Saudis in the 1980s. Spreading the Wahhabi ideology among Muslims in India and in Pakistan. And that's a big problem for that region. And that Saudi Arabia spreading its Wahhabi ideology all throughout the region has been an ongoing big problem. And it's something the United States did. I mean, the United States allowed it to happen for geostrategic reasons. Zbigniew Brzezinski, very much, that was his project, was creating the Afghan trap in Afghanistan, getting the Soviet Union into a situation where they had to militarily go into Afghanistan, and then making it a long, drawn-out conflict that would demoralize the Soviet public, and giving the Soviet Union their own Vietnam, so to speak. And part of doing that was enabling Saudi Arabia to set up this network of very, very extreme fanatical Muslims, around the world. And that's where Al-Qaeda comes out of, and that's where ISIS comes out of. That's Wahhabism, right? It's one particular interpretation. So
so you don't take, just to be clear, you don't take this, the United States has apparently also made Saudi Arabia a non-NATO ally. That was one of the other things that have come out of this meeting. Saudi Arabia apparently is supposed to be contributing 99% of their economy to the United States in regards to funding. And I'm saying it that way because it's absurd. This idea that they're going to give $1 trillion in investment to the United States when their economy is like 1.1 trillion. This is nonsense. So you don't add anything more to this, that for all intents and purposes, Trump is doing this because of either investment and because of Saudi Arabia may want, let's say, more independent foreign policy or more independent streak in regards to their political policy. And Donald Trump is trying to get him closer to the
Saudi
United
Arabia
States.
is changing. Okay. And that is, that's something that the Crown Prince, has been kind of the symbol of, is that world just doesn't need them the way they used to. We now can get oil from fracking, we can get oil from deep sea drilling, and we're not dependent on them. And so because of that, the Crown Prince, he kind of ascended into power. And there was a huge crackdown on corruption. I believe he turned one of the Hilton, or the, was it Hyatt hotels in Riyadh, he turned it into a prison, basically, where he was detaining people. Big crackdown on corruption. And he continues to float different ideas about, they would like to, have Saudi Arabia become something like Singapore, where, they develop, they've got oil and sand, and that's all they've got, right? They got oil and sand. They sell lots of oil. They buy lots of weapons. There's lots of sand. A lot of guest worker slaves that have about a third of the country, from what I understand, are guest worker slaves that have no human rights. And, the oil money is handed out nepotistically. The closer you are to the royal family, the more money you get. There's wild stuff like, in Saudi Arabia, your social status is your license plate, right? How low your license plate number is. The king has one as his license plate number, right?
Are you serious?
Yes. And so in
serious?
Saudi Arabia, if you want to show how important you are, you have a lower license plate number. So 100, 200, that's like, whoa, he must be really important, right? And there's a whole social status, and they drive their, BMWs and their very fancy cars, but it's like, look at the license plate. You tell how important he is. And the oil money is handed out kind of nepotistically among Saudi citizens. Among Saudi citizens, the lowest people on the totem pole are the Shia Muslims, right? Shia Muslims are basically second-class citizens. They have to only work in jobs that do manual labor. They're considered to be apostates because they don't accept Wahhabism. They're Shia. And then a huge chunk of the population are not citizens. They are guest workers that have absolutely no rights whatsoever. I mean, when they come into the country, their employer holds their passport, and they're basically slaves. They can be tortured. They get tortured. Torturing. They're slaves basically. People from Bangladesh, people from the Philippines, people from the Pacific, and they have absolutely no rights whatsoever. And that's Saudi Arabia. But it's changing because the world doesn't need them in the same way. And so, the nuclear thing, that is what I take from it. I mean, the fact that there is going to be nuclear power in Saudi Arabia, and that American companies are going to make it happen. Now, why is that happening? Well, it's happening because Saudi Arabia wants to have its own electricity so that they can sell their oil, and so they can kind of start to develop some kind of economy in Saudi Arabia other than just oil, right? And that's what's going on there. And the United States would prefer they have American companies set it up rather than Russian companies set up their nuclear power facilities. And that's what I kind of took out of the meeting. But there was all kinds of things. When the Crown Prince was in, he was talking about flying cars, and he was talking about all kinds of stuff. I mean, they have to not just be the world's oil supplier at this point, because the world doesn't need them as an oil supplier, and that has created kind of an internal crisis within Saudi